How's it going, guys? Anfield here. Welcome back to a new video. So today's video we're going to be talking a bit more about patch 9.18. Now, I did make a video already on the patch with my initial impressions. These were my thoughts on the first day of playing it on the North American server. I wanted to let you guys know exactly what it was like, what the experience was like, and how I thought the changes have been implemented, whether they were successful or unsuccessful in some cases. So I'm revisiting the discussion of the patch for two reasons. One, the European server is about to go live with the patch, and also, I think it's important after having initial impressions to then also play it for a while, and just sort of let things sit in, let your experiences develop on the patch, and come back again and see if I still feel the same way. And you guys might be interested, those of you on the European server, whether I still feel the same way as I did in my initial video. So to get the easiest one out of the way, the reusable consumables work perfectly. Those of you that were interested and excited about it beforehand, you'll definitely, won't be disappointed. I imagine that will be most of you guys. Some of you may be indifferent or not want them, but, I think most of you probably wanted the reusable consumables, and they're definitely, very, very useful. So the remaining parts of the patch to discuss, the light tanks, the artillery, and the new matchmaker, they all sort of impact each other. None of them can be really separated or segregated without talking about the other. So for this remaining part, it's just going to be a bit of a ramble as I sort of go back and forth between each of the individual topics. So to get things started, I'm going to talk a little bit about my first initial experiences with the matchmaker and the compositions I was seeing versus the more recent compositions and matchmaking experiences I've had on the 9.18 servers. So kind of when I started, I was dealing with a lot of artillery, basically almost 3 artillery per game. If there wasn't 3, there was at least 2, and it was really bad. And I mentioned that in my previous video just about how punishing it was, especially when they were working together. You could see it at the end with my M48 in particular, just how deadly it is when you have 3 artillery that won't leave you alone. You get perma-stunned and things like that. So more recently, this hasn't actually been as much of an issue. It seems that people have actually backed away from playing a lot of artillery, and there have been games that there's been no artillery or just 1 artillery. There have been 2, and there have been the occasional 3, but it is far less common than it was. It's sort of kind of reversed where, you would never see no artillery in the first days of the patch, whereas now you kind of do see some free artillery games and things like that, which is really nice to see. Now, I still do think that we do need a limit on artillery that's less than 3, because we do still get those 3 artillery games. Wow, it's brutal. With the 3 artillery, they're extra splash. I mean, they really can miss you by quite a lot and still stun your tank, because Wargaming introduced the minimum stun time. You do get stunned for quite a while if they do get you. There isn't like, oh, I got like almost no damage, so I'm only stunned for like 5 seconds, Fortunately, that's not the case. So it is quite frustrating to deal with that, so I do still think it does need a limit. So in this case, for those of you that are interested in, how it's going to be on the European server, but you're not really sure whether you want to play it or not, I would wait like a week if you can resist playing the game, because after a week, I think it'll settle down. I expect to see a similar pattern on EU as I saw on NA. I would be surprised if it doesn't play out the same way. I think a lot of artillery players will try it at first, and which is why your games will be packed full of 3 artillery. But I do think that they will back down a little bit and stop playing as much artillery. You have to remember this is going to be very frustrating. Although artillery is actually capable of more damage per game now if you play it correctly, it requires a little bit more thought, and you don't get that satisfying feeling of, oh, I one-shot this guy from the back of the map. That's not really something that artillery is all about anymore, so it's going to frustrate a lot of those players. They're going to back away a little bit, so keep that in mind before you go into the patch. So I also previously talked about the excessive amounts of light tanks in my previous video, and this is something that's settled down a little bit, although not quite to the extent of the artillery. It does seem like people are still quite intrigued with the new lights and still do want to play them, so you're going to see them, and yeah, it kind of sucks. It's going to be bad, especially, in the first couple days of your patch. You're probably going to see a ton of light tanks. Remember that people do have tier 8 light tanks set in their hangar. They're now going to have not only the tier 8 versions, but the new tier 9s, as a lot of those tanks are bumped up to tier 9. And then there's also going to be people that free XP the new light tank tier 10s. So you're going to see those as well, and it's going to fill up the matchmaker with a lot of light tanks, so you just have to be ready for that. It's going to be quite difficult. There's not a great deal you can do to avoid this, although I suppose you could do triple tier 10 platoons with some friends, and that way you're gonna have a higher chance of getting a full tier 10 dump. Now this might mean you might see less light tanks because not that many people will have free XP the tier 10s right off the bat, but it also will probably mean you're also going to see a lot of artillery anyway. So yeah, you're gonna have to deal with one thing regardless of how you decide to play things out. So I also don't know how that's going to affect with EU matchmaker, because obviously the European server is much bigger than the NA server, so you may not get as many tier 10 dumps as I did. So I'm not really sure how that will work, and I'm kind of curious actually to play it myself to see exactly how the matchmaker sort of behaves with a much larger server, whether it's similar or whether it's really different. We'll just have to wait and see on that one. But regardless, yeah, you just have to be careful with the light tanks. If you plan to do any spotting with your light tanks, I would wait. In fact, even if you do wait, it's still not going to be that much better. There's so many light tanks, and I still do believe that we probably need a cap on the amount of light tanks you can see in a battle, because none of them can do their job. Otherwise, they're just playing as mediums, and you know, that's not what they're supposed to be. So yeah, we'll have to wait and see on that one. So I already talked a little bit about how the matchmakers behaved in terms of the fact that I was getting a lot of tier 10 dumps when the patch was first released, even solo, and that doesn't seem to be as much of the case now when I solo. I do get a lot of the normal type of matchmaking, the 357, so that seems to be working as intended. However, if you were to run a full tier 10 platoon, you're much more likely to see the full tier 10 matchup. So this is quite interesting because it could beg the question, is the full tier 10 matchup your optimal farming game? Obviously, there's far more hit points in those kind of battles than there would be in the 357, where there's, you know, tier 8s, tier 9s, much less HP. However, your ability to influence that kind of battle would be much greater than if you were in a full tier 10 game. It also seems to be the case that you do have to be in a platoon to have a much higher chance to get that kind of full tier 10 game, so it's not really that applicable to solo, and if you're in a platoon, you're sharing a lot of your damage anyway, so that's something to keep in mind. But farming aside, it does seem like the matchmaker is doing a pretty good job. You don't get the same map over and over again, and that's a really nice change, as well as the fact that if you are playing a tier lower than 10, you do seem to get, you know, relatively good chances at not being the bottom tier. And if you are the bottom tier, it's actually not so bad to deal with. It kind of depends on the tank. So let's say you're in a tier 8 versus tier 10s, you know, there's only going to be a maximum of 3 tier 10s in that battle, and most tier 8s, at least with their premium, but even with their standard rounds, are okay at dealing with those. It's only when you get to certain tanks that, you know, maybe the low pen is not really suited for it, but it's still not the end of the world, and I think it's better than what we've had in the previous. So overall, I would say a plus for the matchmaker. My only real concern with the matchmaker still is that we get a lot of team wipes, and this is not fun for anybody, whether you win or lose. I mean, maybe some people enjoy winning team wipes, I don't know. I don't play World of Tanks to win in 3 minutes. I like to feel like I've earned my wins, so in that case it's not really fun to win so quickly, and it's also not fun to lose that quickly. Well, it's even worse really, and so in that case there needs to be something done, because it really doesn't seem like this is solved by the new matchmaker, and a lot of that issue I think does come down to the fact that there is an uneven distribution of mediums versus heavy tanks or TDs in a particular match. So one team may get tons of mediums, and the other team get tons of heavy tanks, and one of those teams wins based on the type of map that it is, and that's really not good. So I think more needs to be added onto the matchmaker in order to make sure these kind of situations don't come up. It's not completely unavoidable, because at the end of the day, one team may get a bunch of support heavy tanks like 50 Bs, and the other team may get a mouse platoon with some type 5 heavies, etc, etc. You get the kind of picture. So that may be difficult for Wargame to actually balance properly, but at least with the mediums and heavies being less imbalanced in terms of what team gets more of which, we might see a little bit more even games. So I guess my final point with the matchmaker and team wipes is that in the 357 format, the tier 10s have a very heavy influence. And it can often cause these sort of team wipes because they can snowball the game so heavily due to their influence over the tier 8s. So it was something that I sort of picked up on. I don't know how common it'll really end up being, but it's just something to keep in mind while you're playing. So ultimately, what would my advice be to those of you on the European servers getting ready for patch 9.18? Well, if you could wait a week, let the server sort of settle down a little bit, let the meta begin to sort of formulate itself, it's probably best, you know, just play clan wars or whatever you do otherwise. But I understand a lot of people that's not something you want to do. You want to play pubs, right? So I guess my advice would be play a lot of premiums, especially the preferential premiums. You're not going to see tier 10s. The most you're going to see is tier 9. They're quite dominant in the matchmaker, and it can be quite fun to play the good ones, which, to be fair, the preferentials aren't a great deal of great ones, but you can still have a pretty fun time, especially platooning with your friends. If you're playing those, you're going to be faced up against a lot of tier 8 and 9 light tanks, and a lot of those preferential premiums will do just fine against those types of tanks. If you do want to play tier 10, I highly recommend going in a platoon. This will give you the higher chance at getting the full tier 10 matchmaker, which could be quite fun in a platoon. You are going to deal with artillery, but there's 3 of you, so if you do all have good stats, hopefully that'll split the fire a little bit. Just remember to be careful. I'd also recommend trying out tanks like the Mouse with a super heavy spall liner. The artillery doesn't really affect it whatsoever. It doesn't really do any damage. It's very good at resisting it. You are going to get stunned. That's going to suck, but ultimately it's probably not as bad as some other tanks. So, you know, the Mouse does a very good job. Also, you're going to see a lot of light tanks, like tier 8, tier 9 light tanks. So in that case, the Mouse is going to be so good against those because they really can't do anything against it. So you can just farm them for days. You have really good DPM. They can't really pen you, so it's quite a good tank. You could also say like tanks like the Type 5 Heavy are good because you could sling HE at these unarmored tanks. It's an option if you have that tank. Kind of considered buying it back myself, but it's up to you. But ultimately the meta is going to be pretty chaotic in those first few days, and I would probably try to play a little bit more passively. Let things come to you. Remember, these light tanks, people can't play light tanks to save their lives. They're going to suicide, they're going to be aggressive. Just prep for the shots. Think about where are these guys going to kill themselves and just be there. So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video and you found it helpful in some way. Those of you that are already on patch 9.18 on the NA servers, feel free to give any advice that you might have found and let me know what your experiences have been on the servers. Have they been similar to mine, or have you found different things out? Those of you that are on the European servers, I hope you enjoy it. I think overall it's definitely a step up from patch 9.17, so it is something to look forward to. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll catch you next time.